Abe, why don't you tell us why you wrote Thinking Your Way Out of the Ditch?
Let me quickly mention about our company that I founded 30 years ago. In fact, we're celebrating our 30 years this year, 1986, and
well,
incorporated.
Congratulations!
Thank you, thank you. We provide program management solutions to our federal clients in areas of records management and facilities management and operations and workforce development. The reason I wrote the book was we were going through extremely tough time in the federal arena, primarily caused by market shifts in the sense that the federal austerity program led the introduction of a new award criteria, shifting dramatically from best value to lowest price technically acceptable environment. So when we finally figured out how to win, we found our margins very, very, very low to support the infrastructure we already built in order to deliver superior results. What happens in this market is staff that is executing the program at government sites, they go with the contract when you lose a contract. But the infrastructure at the headquarters to support that still has to be supported by the revenues and the overhead that is generated by the program, and it just wasn't there. So that was very, very difficult. And of course, we lost a very, very major program to a competitor, and that actually is what started the journey downwards.
When was that, Abe? When did
that was in 2010.
Okay.
So since then, it has been basically, just to give you an example, following that for about 12 months period, we bid on 15 projects. And on average, these things run $25,000 to $30,000 out of pocket to write the proposal, prepare, and do all kinds of whatever it takes to do that, capture work and everything. So all of the 15 programs we bid on, we did not win. That means every single one of those was a money loser. And unless you have revenue coming in, you just can't support that level of expenditure for a long period of time. So
that must have been devastating.
It is. It was. It was. So that was really the ditch. The initial one, of course, was the psychological impact of it. We were operating upwards of $60 million. I think we were about $68 million a year company at that time. And all of a sudden, we were dunked down to about $9 million a year. And so you can really see a dramatic drop, basically like falling from the top of a cliff. And getting back up again has been a very big struggle.
Would you describe the book for us in a nutshell? Just tell us briefly about its content.
Absolutely. Fundamentally, what the book does is a reflection of the things that we went through, both to grow the company as well as what happened to us in adverse times. And in order to address that, the individual, the CEO, takes the responsibility, in which case that was me. You begin to be worried about your bad judgment. There are a lot of people that depend on the contract, our employees, for their livelihood. And so the CEO cannot take that very lightly, and I certainly didn't. And so, you know, typically you hire consultants, you go off-site, try to figure things out. But it just wasn't what I wanted to do. There was more to correcting our path that I needed to address. What happens when you face a situation like this? It becomes a tipping point for you to think a little more deeply. And there's no better place to do that than basically facing yourself. Either isolate yourself for a given period of time, think, meditate, and really think what matters to you as a person. There's a struggle. What did I do? Why did I do what I do? And when you do that, you also lose sight of the fact that you've overcome so many things. You begin to take success for granted. And when it's not there anymore, you don't realize you really have, life is a series of difficulties. So spending time with oneself, getting to know oneself, and most of us kind of avoid ourselves. And so spending that time with ourselves gives us the focus that we need to rethink strategically, to think differently, and move forward.
Can you briefly describe each of the sections of the book for us?
Absolutely. We tell the story, begin the story with the first large contract, which was a $400 million opportunity. Again, when we won that, we were like at $3.1 million, basically a break-even point when we won that particular contract. That put us on the map in the federal arena. We began to play with the large guys. We were operating sites for the government at 71 different sites. So, and so we talk about how we got there and what it is that we did that allowed us to actually step up and play in the big arena.
And that's section 1 of the book.
That is section 1 of the book.
Okay.
Yep.
Go on then.
The next one is the section on basically the individual story. That would be my story as a CEO, as leader of the pack. And it basically addresses there are times that you face a dark place and you just don't know what to do. So it addresses the issue of what to do when you don't know what to do.
Okay.
And
so that's section 2.
Yes. Now, do you want me to go? Section 3 is basically the business strategy. Now, business strategies can be written in a million different ways. It just depends on what issues you are addressing. So we talk about how the journeys of how we built the company from a $3.1 million to a $68 million a year business, the strategies we used, the network that we used, the leveraging of our partners and the teaming partners, how we got there. Because most small companies...
Success story then, right?
Absolutely. So it's a success story indeed, yes. Now, in section 4, we talk about entrepreneurs, unfortunately, many of us anyway, when we build an organization, we really want to run it until the end ourselves. So the idea of exits, which is the way typically these things are termed, is not very popular among many operators like myself. The question is, what do I exit? Basically, the company is me. That is not to sound self-centered, but the leadership must come from the top, and you're responsible for that. You're responsible for, the CEO is responsible for building the organization as well as running it and seeing through it, to it that company succeeds and people have their employment, whatever your objectives are. So dramatic situations such as this make you realize that there is an end to everything. At some point, the business has to change hand. Mm-hmm. And so you begin to think, you may not buy that first time. You begin to think, that is a possibility that really we have not considered. And the time to think about that really isn't to wait to the time that, in our case, wait until the dramatic events happen, but build into your thinking all along, because it makes, if you do decide to exit, it makes it easier to do that. So we talk about the strategies for exiting on that.
Okay. And your final section?
The final section is really interesting. It's an observation of life, reflections. In one section, there is a story of a Azzi sage master who decides to, after many years, decide to retire. He decides to pass the baton of leadership to a 5-year-old girl. And there is a wisdom to be gained from that. We talk about that, and it's very interesting reading in that. And I don't want to spoil for the reader what that involves.
No, please don't. Please don't.
Yeah.
But this final section is sort of philosophical reflections.
It is philosophical. It's what our teachers deposit in us. It is what the leadership of our country, our culture deposits in us. In one case, my daughter and I had made a trip to Ethiopia, and as we were going from place to place, I was reminded of a couple of things. One was a advice that was rendered by the Emperor Haile Selassie as he was struggling to rebuild his country right after the Italian War, in which he said, we are struggling. He refers to himself as a we, as you probably remember. We are struggling to build a school for you. He's addressing us school children at the time, so that you will gain knowledge, study relentlessly, so that you can move yourself and your country forward. This is our hope, and this is our plea. Now, then at school, I went to a boarding school run by Christian missionaries. There was a line that I remember, actually it's not even a line, it's a song, and probably resonates with the listeners as well, that says, this little light of mine, I am going to let it shine. When you're a kid, it doesn't mean a whole lot. But when I went back and started reflecting upon those things and realized in both situations, what have we done to pay back the community, the culture that raised us?
Well, this sounds really fascinating, Abe. Why don't you tell us some of the takeaways? What are the 3 or 4 things you want the reader to take away from your book when they finished it? What are some of the concrete benefits?
The concrete benefit is really to look at this, that when we get knocked off our balance, when confusion reigns, it is critically important to stabilize our internal self first. And to also recognize everything in the universe depends on the energy of faith. So you must have faith to sustain you through the difficult times. And also to know that to demonstrate the old adage that says tough times don't last, but tough people do, is really true. It is the greatest blessing, and I think we need to recognize this, that we are forced to struggle with difficulties and to wrestle for what we get. When success blinds us from those realities, we begin to be confused. So I understand the laws of the universe that we have to work hard and endure pain for the good that we get from life. And I think those are the points that I would like to share with the audience, that each one of us lives with as a victim of limiting inhibitions, that it does not have to be that way.
Well, it sounds like a really fascinating book. Well, I know it is, since I'm through half of it, and I love it.
Thank you.
Where can people buy the book, Abe?
Yeah, for one thing, it is on Amazon. I would also give you a website here.
Please.
You ready?
Yes.
www.internusllc.com, and I'll spell the Internus for you.
Please.
INTERNUSLLC.com.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to tell us about your new book, Abe, Thinking Your Way Out of the The Ditch. I'm looking forward to finishing it. I already know it's a great book, and I know our listeners are going to want to find it at the website or at Amazon, and I wish you a very good day.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to share my experience with the audience, and I hope that the audience finds that useful.